Hi guys! Welcome to Girls Gone Woke, where we inspire you to live a more conscious and joyful life. I'm Monica.
And I'm Claire. We're so grateful to have you here and bring you along on this journey with us.
Let's get started! You gonna interview me today, girl?
Yes, today it's my turn to interview Monica, and I'm jacked. I actually love being in this role. It's kind of
I
fun.
know, I liked interviewing you last time too.
Okay, so we're just going to dive right in. This week, I am interviewing Moni on what it's like being an ER nurse in ways that she copes with being and working in such a high stress environment. So, with that being said, let's just get started. Moni, what inspired you to want to become a nurse, and how old were you when you really found out that was your calling?
Oh, I actually had it lucky looking back because ever since I was like 4 or 5 years old, I remember adults and teachers, they'd always ask kids like, oh, what do you want to do when you're older? And I always said nurse. It was just like innately in me.
Yeah.
I never thought about it. It was just like a deep knowing. And I literally never steered from that ever. I had no medical people in my family, so I don't even know where that came from. Like all my family is business.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't even have anybody to like look up to in that role. It just was something that I knew I wanted to do. It wasn't until later in life that I realized that that wasn't normal, and people don't always know exactly what they want to do from a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say I had it lucky. But I had a internship in an ER one summer in college and just kind of fell in love with it. Like I really, really love the fast-paced environment. Now I'm getting a little bit burnt out with it, but I will give some coping tips later. And I was lucky enough to get my first job out of college was at this level 1 trauma center in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my first shift shadowing somebody, and I was in a trauma room, and I was like, what the fuck did I get myself into? Like, it's not like most jobs where you can be like, oh, it's okay to make a mistake, because if I were to make a mistake, I could literally kill somebody. So it's just that much added pressure.
Oh my gosh, I cannot imagine that. And do you have one experience working in the ER that always just kind of sticks with you? Like, did you have any of those experiences in the beginning?
I mean, a lot. Probably won't share in here just because they're odd and some of them are very graphic, but
Mm-hmm.
just things that you couldn't make up. Like I had a trauma patient who EMS literally just handed me this giant bag and they're like, oh, this is his leg. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like a motorcycle accident, just like shit that you can't even, it's just so different every day. Never gets boring. I've had patients that have shot themselves. That's always super sad. After a while, you just get so desensitized to it. So it's just like another day. You don't even really think twice about it.
Like you said, you work in such a stressful environment where it's literally life and death. Like, my stresses are completely different than your stresses. And usually my stress happens the night before because I know what's coming the next day. You being an ER nurse, like you literally have no idea what's going to come a minute from now or like an hour from now. So how would you cope with that sort of, did you ever like have anticipation for the next day, just not knowing what was going to happen at work?
Yeah, and that would give me anxiety. And kind of to be a good ER nurse, you have to kind of think into the future and think 5 steps ahead just so that you are on top of your shit and you can
Right.
kind of predict if something is going to go wrong, that
Mm-hmm.
you're prepared. But then also that does cause a lot of extra anxiety because a lot of times the worst doesn't happen, but we
Mm-hmm.
think it's going to. So something that I've done is just learn to try to live more in the present moment at work, which is hard to do. I'll know what to do if something goes wrong. I don't have to be like preparing in my mind for that bad event to happen.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody codes, like I'll know what to do in that moment, and I don't have to be freaking out about it happening for my whole shift.
Oh my gosh. And you are seriously going from potentially saving somebody's life or witnessing a death and then to not be able to have a break to process that. That is
Yeah.
why nurses are so incredible because literally you just have to, I feel like you just have to get so strong in your own headspace to get through that.
You do, but it also can take a toll if you're not aware of it. And if you don't do work on yourself, like for instance, I remember your grandma was upstairs at the hospital one day that I was working. And this just shows how good nurses can be because we're trained to really suppress our emotions. But then if you're not careful, you can take that suppressing emotions outside into your normal life, which you don't want to do. So I was working in the ER. I literally had just had a 4-year-old die at me, my patient. Right after that, within like 2 minutes, I remember I went upstairs to visit you and your grandma, and I'm sure you would never know that anything had happened.
No, I literally gave you the biggest hug. You were acting so calm, cool, and collected. Like, no, I never would have had any idea that's what you just witnessed and how tragic.
But after 5 years, seeing stuff like that, you really do just become desensitized and almost numb to it. The ER is always so busy that you don't get time to process anything. You just have to be like, okay, on to the next one. We have like 50 people in the waiting room. We don't have time for like emotions here, which is okay at work, but we have to learn how to not do that at home, which was the hardest for me because I got so comfortable suppressing my emotions at work that I then pretended like I didn't feel on my off days. And I was just also just so numb to myself on my off days. That was when I realized that I needed a break from at least the trauma, but it's just becoming aware of that because that's when it can get kind of dangerous.
I remember when I came to visit you in Madison a couple years ago, actually when we were just starting to brainstorm about GGW,
Yeah.
and we would always have just like heart to hearts because obviously we're besties. And I was just asking you how work was, and you would tell me these stories just with like no emotion in your voice whatsoever. And my reaction, I would like scream. I'd be like, "What? Like, oh my gosh, you did what today?" And you'd literally be like, "Yeah, I did that," and that's just it is what it is. And I'd be like, "Holy ish! Like that is freaking crazy, Moni." And you were just so freaking like stoic and strong with it. Hearing your day-to-day life, like with what you experienced, it was just mind-blowing to me. And I was like, "Are you okay?" I remember that was my first reaction, but you were so just like a fact about it all that
Mhm.
I was like, how do you even get through? I also want to fast forward to what it was like being an ER nurse dealing with this like pandemic. And I'm sure nurses are so sick of hearing the word COVID, but do you remember like the beginning when it first started?
Yeah, I mean, there's just an added stress and anxiety, obviously, with the pandemic and not having a vaccine. But I personally believe that like fear lowers your immune system and it's not going to help at all being afraid of something. We have the right PPE to protect ourselves, and being a nurse, like you expose yourself to disease to help people every day. It's just this pandemic, since there's no cure, no vaccine, has really highlighted frontline workers for the first time. And I feel like there's been so many instances in the past too where we've gone through shit and put ourselves out there and we just don't get recognition for it. So yes, we're putting ourselves at risk, and it's added anxiety because you don't want to bring it back to your family. You don't want to get it yourself, but it's just tricky because I mean, every year the flu comes around and the vaccine isn't always accurate, and you could be a young 20-year-old who has no comorbidities and end up dying from the flu. So there's really just, I think, the lack of predictability and the uncertainty with COVID really freaks people out. But nurses are brave and that's their job, like helping people. It's not the safest job, but we knew that going into it. Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like you take it day by day and you do what you have to do, and that's all you can do.
Right. I just have a feeling listeners would be curious to hear like what your experience was like. Also, man, just being such an empath like you are, do you think that made nursing almost harder for you in the beginning because you could feel and like take in what people were going through?
Definitely. And I think that's why I was so quick to just build up all these walls
Mm-hmm.
to the point where I literally felt numb, because that was how I survived it. And that was my safety with it, because it was either I felt very, very deeply, which really isn't allowed in the ER. There's no time, like, no one wants to see your nurse crying. It's like okay, what the fuck are you doing? You're supposed to be helping me and now you're crying. So
Right.
it's the safe thing to do is just build up all this armor and not feel anything. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I like to do. But then unfortunately, I took that into my off days too.
Right. Oh my gosh. I guess I never even thought about that too. Like every personality is so different. And if you go into the healthcare field in one way or another, you kind of have to suppress who you are in order to like get through your days. And just to think about how that carries over in your personal life is a challenge in itself. Did you feel like it also helped you grow in certain ways, even though you did have to suppress your
Oh, yeah,
emotions?
for sure. It definitely made me a lot more confident very quickly. It also just made me really value my life and my health because, like I said, it really changed my perspective and my view on life. And it just truly shows you firsthand how precious life is. And
Mm-hmm.
it was just very a huge reality check for me seeing a patient that would come in around my age and they were in a car crash and they passed away. It's like, okay, I'm not invincible. This could happen to me just as easily as it happened to them. I just realized I had so much to be grateful for. I was healthy and alive, and yeah, my problems just weren't really problems after a crazy day in the ER.
Right.
So I am grateful that I became super numb at the trauma center because then it made me realize how much work I had to do on myself. And that is what got me into self awareness and just learning to be more vulnerable. And my like patient specifically that made me realize that I wanted to help people at a deeper level, like what we're doing with Girls Gone Woke, was the patient that I said shot himself in the head, suicidal. At that point, it just made me realize like I don't want to help somebody when I feel like it's too late. Like I'd rather help them before they shoot themselves in the head. If they maybe had the resources to become self-aware themselves and live a more conscious present life and had tips and tricks on how to love themselves and just find like a deeper, more fulfillment within themselves, that would be so much more rewarding to me, helping them in more of a preventative way than when I feel like it's too late.
Right. So, working in such a high stress environment, Moni, I know there's a lot of nurses that face burnout. And I know being a diabetic, I talked about me just going through burnout with my own disease, but it also happens in careers. And I know that's something you faced this year. Like, will you talk a little bit about it?
Well, the amazing thing about nursing is that we have literally endless opportunities and options being a nurse. But
Yep.
so often we get stuck in like the first thing that we did out of college and we think that that's where we need to like die and retire. And I get it because there's a sense of comfort, you know, that specialty, and it is scary going into something else and having to be the new person and learning a new role. But I will say that it's so important to trust yourself and follow your gut and try different opportunities if you are feeling burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
What I did for me when I was feeling super stressed at the trauma center and feeling burnt out, and what I still do now is I envision myself. So think of a coworker that's 10 years older than you. Envision yourself in their shoes. And is that where you want to be? Does that make you happy looking at yourself there in 10 years? Or does that give you anxiety? And for me, when I did that, it gave me major anxiety. So that was my cue to fucking run.
Get your ass out of
Get
there.
my ass out of there. Yeah, I'm not going to get stuck. And it's just valuing yourself, trusting yourself, knowing that you know what's best for you. If you need a break from whatever specialty you're in, don't be afraid to try something different. Like for me, I tried travel nursing and now I'm per diem in an ER still, but I can work 1 day a week if I want. I can work 1 day a month if I want. I'm completely in control of my hours there, which is really freeing and great. And I
Mm-hmm.
tried different preventative medicine clinics, bougie LA, like home IV things, just something so different to give me that needed break that I needed. And is home IV is going to be my new purpose? No, but it's good for me right now, and it's what I need right now to kind of recharge. So I would definitely recommend just not being afraid to try something new. Like, worst case scenario, you try something new, you hate it, and there's always going to be jobs in your specialty. Always. Like, just take the risk. I mean, it is scary, but I think it's scarier to get stuck at a job and retire being unhappy and not taking care of yourself. I know so many nurses, older nurses, that you can tell burnt out a long time ago, and they're just so unhappy, so negative. It's just not a life that I would want to live. And you take that outside of work too. And I was talking to one coworker, but she was like, yeah, I don't want my kids to remember me as this tired, crabby mom because I'm so burnt out with work. It's just like not worth it. And I totally agree with that, because especially little kids, like, you don't want to come home and then unload all your stress on them or not have the energy to like hang out with them and play. It's just not
Yeah,
worth it to me.
right.
So I would take the risk.
Yes. Well, I think you're so brave, and it's so hard. It's so easy, no matter what career you're in, to just kind of feel stuck there because you're too scared of what's going to happen next. And I just think you're amazing, Mom, because literally when something doesn't feel right, you're so good about like trying a change and trying something different and adjusting your situation. And I think that's honestly what makes the happiest people, because I feel
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of anxiety comes when you're feeling stuck and helpless. And
Yeah.
you're so powerful because you're just taking it in your own hands and trying something new. And
Oh,
being a nurse itself deserves like all the praise in the world, because honestly, just like hearing you talk about your career today on our little interview and just outside of this too, it's freaking amazing. So
thank
all
you.
of that being said, my last question for you is what are some ways that you cope with the high stresses that come with being a nurse?
Yes. So, one huge one, and it sounds very simple, is to breathe throughout your shift. And I know that sounds so dumb, but when I'm really stressed out, I hold my breath. I just do. And especially being in the hospital, like, I would subconsciously hold my breath too, because there's so much disease and virus blowing around in the air that I'm just like, I don't want to breathe this in and get sick. So I'd be at work just like taking really shallow breaths, but then that signals to your body that it's an unsafe environment. So then that just further stresses you out. So what I did at work was kind of set up like trigger points that would remind me to take a deep breath. So for me, every time I went to go pee, I would take 5 deep breaths just to signal to my body that I was safe. Because when you're in such a hectic environment, it can feel unsafe, but really you are safe. And then another one was anytime I went to the med machine and
Mm-hmm.
was waiting for my meds to come out, that was another trigger point for me to take a deep breath. It can be whatever works for you. If it's while you're waiting for the computer to log on, just find those little moments of stillness throughout your shift, because I promise you they are there, even though they seem like they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And take that time to just get still, be present, and breathe, because having those little trigger points throughout your shift does really help. It helped me. Another tip that I would give, and this is just a funny story, but it helps me not be so hard on myself, is nurses have so much stress and so much pressure on them to be perfect and to do all these things, when really we only have 2 hands, we're only one person, there's only so much that we can do. And
Yeah.
so a funny story to go with this is one of my coworkers at the trauma hospital. I love him. He was this gay guy that was in a trauma. And if you're not from a trauma facility, traumas can just be very hectic, because in a level 1 trauma center, you have the ER doctor, you have the trauma doctor, you have orthopedic surgeon, you have all the residents. I was at a teaching facility, so there can literally be like 20 people in one room. And
Mm-hmm.
typically there's one nurse charting, one nurse that's the doer or doing all these orders. So he was in a level 1 trauma, and had all these doctors just barking out orders at him because this patient was dying. And they're like, what's his blood pressure? Does he have IV access yet? We need to get the Belmont set up. Like, he needs blood transfusions immediately. And barking all this at him at the same time. And he literally just whips up his hands mid trauma. I don't recommend you doing this, but he was like, I only have 2 hands, bitches. But it's so true. It's like,
Yeah.
so anytime that I'm feeling like overwhelmed or like I'm drowning, I just think to myself, like, I only have 2 hands, bitches. I don't need to go saying it out loud to people, but it just makes me laugh and
Mm-hmm.
brings things back in perspective because end of the day, like there is literally only so much that we can do. We're not superhuman as long as you're practicing safe patient care.
Good point too, because I feel like humor, even in like the darkest of times, like it also helps get you through. And sometimes just reminding ourselves that we are human with no matter what stress you're going through, it's just kind of like, you're right, I'm doing the best I can. And as long as
Yeah,
like when I know that I'm doing the best I can, that's like when I can relax.
right. And that your
So,
patients are safe. It is what it is. End of the day, you can only do so much. So that is always funny and comforting to me. I do have one more tip,
okay.
and managers will not like me for this tip, but I'm going to say it anyways. I would take full advantage of taking a sick day if you really feel like you are burnt out and you are just like emotionally unwell. I would call it like a mental health day.
Yeah.
Literally call in and don't abuse this, but whenever you truly do feel the need, like you just need a me day, you need a self care day, call in. And I would do this at the trauma center, and they always ask, like, oh, why are you sick? Like, what's going on? Like, is it cough, fevers, chills, whatever? And I'm just like,
Mhm.
mental health day. No one ever says shit to that. They're like, oh, okay. So it's
Yeah.
like, and if somebody does say something to that, then you probably don't want to be working there anyways. So
No.
I fully support and recommend taking a mental health day every now and then if you need it, because you can't give from an empty cup. We all know that. We've all heard when you're
Mhm.
on the plane, you have to put your own oxygen mask on before you help other people. So, end of the day, like you need to value yourself and love yourself enough to know when you really do need a break. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I also just think that nurses can be so hard on ourselves, and we give, and think that we don't have our own needs, but we all do. We're human, and you're not a failure if you need to take a me day. Like,
Uh,
take a freaking break,
take
would
a
be my
freaking break.
recommendation.
Honey, if you're getting 30 minutes of a break per 12-hour shift, you take as many freaking mental health breaks as you freaking need. I'm still shook by that. But Bonnie, you literally killed it. I feel like people everywhere will just benefit from hearing what it's actually like because if you're not a nurse and you're fairly healthy and you don't, well, pray to God that you're not in an emergency. I feel like they can kind of take the healthcare system for granted. And I've seen it firsthand with like so many different times. One, because I'm a delinquent, and two, because there's just been a lot of scariness around me. But
Yeah.
nurses literally deserve all the credit in the world. And what you guys deal with and see and have to get through mentally on a daily basis, I just can't even comprehend it. So, oh my gosh, thank you for just like laying it all out there because I feel like people need to hear
You are so welcome, girl.
it.
So welcome.
This was I know I love like interviewing you too because I feel like even though we're best friends, I still always learn something new every time.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna take those trigger points and like put those into my own life. Maybe if it's like even a bracelet or something
Yeah.
that I can just look at to remind me to like take a deep breath because
Mhm.
I'm the same way. I like hold it all in and I just like forget to breathe.
Me
So
too.
that is
Yeah.
such a good point.
Good.
Yeah.
Yay. I know. I feel like
Yeah.
it can be relatable to anybody that's in a stressful job too.
Right. Whether you're a nurse or not, there's a lot of these strategies that I'm going to take and use. So we hope they benefit you too. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Share with any nurses or non-nurses that you know that you would think would benefit from this, and let us know if you have any questions or any topic ideas, and we'll see you guys next Sunday. Bye.
bye.